is to default too soon to saying it a little bit more loudly. So I've always tried not to say anything that I didn't think was so, but the forcefulness with which I might deliver it, the degree of conviction in which I might pronounce on a certain point or predicted result, I might have overemphasized just in the hope of seeing that I got recognition for what the actual degree of risk or problem was. These days, I really try very, very hard not to do that. I ask people, do you really want an evaluation? Okay, here it is, and I just give it. And I try not to overstate or understate the way it looks from the outside.
After those are given, and we're in the give and take of the mediation in the various rooms to which we are assigned, I know in my own experience there are moments where I'm absolutely convinced we're wasting our time. There are moments of promise and hope for a reasonable resolution. First, how do you keep the parties there when there are highs and lows? And secondly, how would you counsel us as lawyers at mediation to assist our clients and make good judgments about whether to stay or to go?
In terms of what keeps the parties there, I don't mean this facetiously, the amount of money and effort that they've put into coming to a mediation usually will keep them there, especially if they've flown in from around the globe. That will usually keep them there until the mediator says, we're done. If parties look like they're literally getting ready to pack up, then you have to sit down and explain to them whether and why they should stick around. Conversely, sometimes I suggest to people that they just pack it up, or at least I let them know, look, I can't tell you that 3 hours from now, and if you want to stick around, I'm here, I'm game, but I think we might have run into a wall. So I try to I don't try to keep people there just to keep the process alive if I think it's dead. Conversely, experience has taught me that many, many times I will be listening to a little voice in the back of my mind saying, Tone, it's dead. Give it up. You've crossed the line from diligence to masochism or sadism. Just let it go. And any rational person looking at it from the outside would have agreed with me, and those cases have broken through and settled. And what did it, why it happened, I don't know. But since experience has taught me that it not only can happen, frequently does, I've grown chary about too soon pronouncing things dead. In my own practice, I face the reality that people come walking in, skillful litigators, skillful business people, who've been trying to get something resolved for years and haven't been able to do it. And they come walking in, not just millions, tens of millions, hundreds, occasionally billions of dollars apart. It's daunting. And if after the first few hours they're still pretty darn far apart, one is tempted to say, well, looks like we just can't get this resolved. But experience has taught me that simply hanging in and staying with the process varies a little bit year to year, but 8 or 9 out of 10 get resolved year after year, no matter how bad it looked, no matter how far apart people were. And sometimes that's all I need to reflect back to people to keep them engaged in the process, that simple reality. You hang in, the odds are with you.
Some of the tools you use to get us to hang in would be foreign to those who don't mediate a lot. What I'm going to ask you to do is introduce to us and give a little bit of life to some of those skills, like a mediator's proposal, bracketing, high-low, or anything you want to talk about that you look to sometimes help bring the parties together.
In terms of suggesting different ways of trying to bracket, contain, reduce the risk or the transactional costs on disputes, it can serve a variety of purposes. Sometimes, always the best resolution is just get it done. But sometimes the second best resolution is to get the dispute pared down so that there's much less economically at risk, so that the time frame is radically foreshortened in getting a resolution, and so the transactional costs are dramatically reduced. And you can accomplish that in a variety of ways. But also introducing those kinds of concepts can help to illustrate to people where things are stuck and why. If, for example, you say, look, we've got 50 issues you've been fighting about. What's the most critical one where you're sure the other side is undervaluing it in some fashion, and that's what's keeping us apart? Or you can suggest from your own perspective that this might be the case. It gives people a chance to really focus on how sure am I about the outcome on this issue? How much would I be willing to gamble on it? And it can precipitate reevaluation of positions. So at the same time as you're helping people to focus on why we're stuck where we're stuck, you're giving them the opportunity to really hold it in their hands and decide how stuck they are on that particular point. So suggesting alternative processes, while that's usually not people's first option as an outcome, can be a very useful process tool in terms of getting them to evaluate why the dispute is where it is. Mediator's proposal I found just a useful way of avoiding people being fearful about taking the last step for fear it's not going to be reciprocated. So basically what you tell people is, listen, I'm going to put this proposal on the table. I know you don't want to do it, but if you stretch and do this, here's what I can assure you back. Unless the other side also stretches and does it, they're not going to know that you were willing to do it, so you will not have bid against yourself and put in a new floor or ceiling on any future negotiations. Also, you don't have to worry about this being an iterative process, because once I've said, okay, we're done, here's my proposal, we're done. And if one of the other side says no, I'm not going to say, well, how about this then, or how about that? So it lets people know that this is the last hard decision that they might be called on to make, that they're not going to end up bidding against themselves. It gives them a comfort that just isn't present when you're doing an iterative process and asking them, well, are you willing to make one last offer, or here, one more demand?
The section of litigation has a series called Sound Advice, where members do little 8 or 10 minute videos giving sound advice to younger or less experienced lawyers. I'm going to seek some sound advice for all of us from Antonio Piazza. Give us, in a capsule, if you will, some sound advice on how we best are effective and succeed at mediation.
I think what I'd rather do is ask a sound question. It's a simple reality that for myself and my peers in the field, we routinely work on cases where incredibly skillful, well-intentioned litigators have been throwing themselves at a process designed to resolve a dispute, sometimes for years, at great energy, great expense to their clients. And very often, it hasn't moved 1 inch toward resolution in that process. In fact, often it's moving further away from resolution. We know that very frequently, these disputes resolve sometime in a single day, sometime in a couple of days of mediation. The advice I'd like to give back is to ruminate on why that is. What's happening differently there? And in no way is this implying any criticism of the litigation process. It's a completely different process. But I think the most useful way one could prepare for mediation, and it might also be useful in terms of enhancing one's approach as a litigator, is to say, well, what was different there? Ego would like to suggest, oh, it's because we brought in some really sharp third party and they made a difference on it. The reality is that that is rarely what's changed. What's changed is, in some fashion, the forum. What's changed is the perception of what the job is. What's changed is how communications occur internally and across the table. And just reflecting on that and thinking, okay, we know, in fact, disputes can get resolved in a day, even if the parties walk in $1 billion apart. Why is that?
I read an article you wrote recently about peacemaking. And we've talked a bit about your skills and your colleagues' skills, about utilizing the mediation process to end armed conflict. Take your skills and your experience and share with us the possibilities.
Well, the reason the question arises from me is that I recall vividly when we started trying to interest people in utilizing mediation to resolve civil disputes. Having been there at the birthing of it, what I heard back from people was, well, wait a minute, excuse me, why is that going to help? We're skilled at resolving disputes. It's what we do for a living as litigators. We've got a system that's been tested for years. It works. why do we think you're going to add anything to the process? This is just going to be another waste of time and money for us, or worse. And they had every good reason to think that. It simply wasn't true. We now know that very complex disputes that have gone on for years in litigation can and do resolve in as little as a day of mediation. So the question comes up, is it possible that somewhere there's a war going on right now or about to start, which doesn't need to continue for want of some alternative forum within which the issues can be addressed? And it's not because I've got some delusions about, oh, it'll be as simple as resolving a lawsuit. Of course not. The question remains, if it could even speed up by a day the resolution of a fight that is costing lives and causing destruction and misery, how can we not try it? Well, but we've been sending skillful diplomats, politicians, and they've been acting as mediators. It's the same as saying, well, but for years we had skillful judges who would hold settlement conferences. There was a difference. Once you had a cadre of professional mediators applying themselves to it made a real difference in the landscape of civil litigation. And the thought, and it's not a certitude, but it's a thought that I can't let go of, is what if some of that is transferable into resolving armed conflicts? And I simply want to find out. And if the answer is no, it isn't, well, it isn't. But if perchance it is, I don't want to stand in front of God someday and say we didn't try.
It's been an honor. It always is an honor. I thank you so very, very much. This has been a conversation with Antonio Piazza.
And such a pleasure. Thank you.
Mediation with the Master. Thank you.